My brother, Jonathan Hale, was a magistrate in Salem town during the tragic witch hunt, which we have so thankfully put behind us. The hysteria had besieged our town for a long time. Then, as there is today, there were always accusations of witchcraft. My brother ministered many of these occasions, and he took the testimony of those hapless victims of neighbors' wrath and vengeance. One woman in particular garnered the suspicion of her neighbors. Truthfully, her appearance and behavior were peculiar. One could almost forgive her fellow townspeople for being frightened of her. Her name was Mehitable Corbett, a withered old crone, bent and haggard, with vibrant green eyes that still retained a menacing vigor, despite being set in a world-weary and worn frame that they occupied. Mehitable had the most detestable habit of reading the lines and blemishes in people's faces and imparting their fortunes to them, when they might fall ill and even when they might depart this world, most unsettling, as you can imagine. There is even a rumor among our fellow townsfolk that she possessed a great spell book with dark streaks of blood upon it. Those who crossed her path were convinced there was a wickedness afoot about her. My brother on many occasions counseled her to desist from these horrible practices and to repair her relationship with her fellow townsfolk. Mehitable agreed that she would on each occasion, and was thanked my brother for the kindness and tolerance he offered her. Mehitable was a weaver by trade, and she presented to my brother, by way of respect and friendship, a cloth that she had woven and embroidered, a remarkable demonstration of her skill, set with jeweled hues of sapphires, emeralds, and frosted violets, with the image of my brother's house sewed neatly in the center. Very fine, very beautiful. My brother accepted it graciously and right away. It was laid over the back of a settle bench in his chamber. In June of 1692, Mehitable, not surprisingly, was arrested again. Events had been set in motion that would keep my brother from showing her his usual tolerance. The superstition had so engulfed our community that there were calls for greater authority to be used against those accused souls. Many people attended Mehitable's examination, an examination that was to prove to be quite curious and very shocking. During the questioning, Mehitable's cap was taken off to reveal a shock of white hair, closely cropped to the scalp, with the exception of a tangled, woven mat of hair that uncoiled from the nape of her neck and fell with a signally soft sound to the floor, extending the very length of her. The room fell silent. An elf lock, the Reverend Paris called it, a horrible superstition, a tangled mat of hair woven by imps to draw bad luck and disease from the body, trapping the bad humors that cause this malaise into its putrid snarl. A custom often engaged by our ancestors, but judging by the looks of the people in this room, a custom that would not be tolerated here. One of the girls shrieked that she saw the very imp itself attached to it. Horrid little creatures crouched on the floor, standing next to Mehitable. They cried for the lock to be shorn from her head. Mehitable cried out in anguish, fearing that this act would cause her death. She appealed to my brother. She pleaded with him. But in this very public forum, my brother was not about to show his customary tolerance and kindness. He bid her be silent. Further, he cut the lock of hair from her head himself and ordered it burned. Mehitable never spoke to my brother again. She regarded him with an unshakable contempt. Not a fiery, aggressive anger that one would think her indignation would warrant. No, this was something far more sinister. Cold, calculating anger set deep within her eyes that was far more insidious. Incredibly, my brother claimed that at the very moment he cut the lock of hair from her head, a sound erupted inside him, that of 1,000 whispering voices that fell away, and after a few moments became one poisoned voice that croaked and incited horrible curses upon him forever. Whether he be asleep or awake, day or night, whether at a great distance or so close that he could feel the specter's breath upon his face. Within a few days, my brother began to look pale and drawn. He complained of troubled sleep. Later on, he complained of being awakened at night by the most tormentative of nightmares. Nightmares that he claimed were caused by Mehitabel's bedcloth. He claimed that at night, the fibers became the deadening hue of matted gray hair, that of that chattering old madwoman, as he called it, and that the fringes around the edges became like hundreds of ghastly hairs that brushed against his skin. At first, he treated this strange affliction as if it were a joke, trying to laugh off the fact that this was part of his hallucinations. But as time went on, the torment began to take hold of him, to reach the very core of him. He appeared very ill, though no physical ailment could catch the doctor's understanding. Yet he continued to languish. It was at this point that I decided to help my brother and move in with him. His wife had passed away many years ago, leaving he and his young daughter, Rebecca. Although there were 2 good women in the town to look to the housekeeping, I felt my brother needed my company. So I moved in upstairs in the attic above this chamber here. My brother was anxious to have the bedcloth removed from his sight. I did his bidding at once and placed the bedcloth in the room where the servants slept. The next morning when I awoke, I found that the bedcloth had been returned to the chamber and was neatly laid out on his pallet. Thinking this a mistake of the maids, I returned the bedcloth to the kitchen area where they slept. That evening, I was awakened by the most horrifying scream. When I entered my brother's bedroom, I found him sitting up in bed, motionless. The moon was very bright, and I could see Mehitabel's bedcloth upon him. As I approached him, he didn't notice me. His gaze was fixed upon the bedcloth. "Do you see them?" he hissed. I became concerned to see my brother unhinged so. I held out my hand to wake him, to assure him. "How can you not see them? Monstrous! Horrible! How do you not see him?" His whisper strangled and pitched oddly, his eyes wide with fear. He ordered me to remove the bedcloth at once and destroy it. I obeyed him immediately and hastily ran to the north field where I dug a hole and buried the bedcloth. The cloth shone unnaturally, drained of all color, a trick of the moonlight I thought, but troublesome nonetheless. And the last bit of earth covered the fibers. I could have sworn I heard the sound of children's voices coming from up underneath the ground. Fearing my mind had gone the way of my brothers, I quickly made my way back to the house. The next morning, I found my brother dead. His mouth, wide open, smeared with earth. Torn and matted, Mehitabel's bedcloth was wrapped tightly around him. fibers were as gray and cold as my brother's dead body.
Found her, frozen in the road. Beautiful, young Rebecca Hale, the young miss of this house, for whom this stone was carved and delivered just this morning. One evening, a few weeks passed, Thomas Mallock, Old Boston Road, looked out his window and saw Rebecca lying motionless, dressed in nothing but her linen shift. Two small children in dark, gray, ragged cloaks crouched at her side. Well, he called out to his wife and ran out the door, but by the time he reached Rebecca, he knew there was no help he could offer her. And the mysterious children were nowhere to be seen. And though every element in this evening's strange events rattled him to his very core, he was most shaken by these strange little ones. For they left no footprints in the evening's fresh snow. When he found Rebecca, the only tracks next to her were her own. How could that be, he would ask me sometime later. His eyes red and hollow as he struggled with all he had seen. I knew he spoke the truth. I knew these strange children. Rebecca came upon me one evening here in her father's chamber. I had come to retrieve an heirloom that her father, Judge Hale, had confiscated. An heirloom he had no right to take. You see, Judge Hale and others, they visit the homes of those accused witches in the night. There are things happening in my home, in the homes of my neighbors, that I will not abide. Well, Rebecca, upon discovering my trespass, understandably demanded to know why I was in her home. Well, I tried to explain, but I knew she would never see the wrongdoings of her father or other officers of the court, considering they were her kin. She would share our encounter with all of them, whilst formally accusing me of witchcraft. She would tell them that I bore a great and violent malice, that my bearing towards her was a result of her father's role in the arrest of my mother, Mahatable Corbett. Yet what she failed to mention is how her spiteful tongue, her poisoned gossip, contributed to that arrest far more than any other. In the meeting house, she cried out against me that my mother's imps had aided me in the robbery of her father. Oh, she described them as demons, small, cloaked creatures that she first mistook as siblings of mine. Of course, the court fell silent as she described one of them as they walked up to me and handed me the necklace it had retrieved from a leather trunk. She described the hand. The hand had been very malformed. At first glance, it seemed the plump, rosy hand of a child. At its edges, she could see that it turned a sallow grayish black. Oh, nails, long, sharp, claw-like nails, unlike any child's. The face suddenly looked up at her, suddenly visible from beneath its matted cloak. To her, it seemed a face at once both unutterably beautiful, yet to look upon it filled her with fear. Light seemed to shine from beneath the child's skin, illuminating features both perfect and ghoulish. Eyes that held her fixed in their jaundiced and yet unmistakably cruel interiors. No. I dare to say it was a face that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Well, you. You will not to tell this to anyone. No, not you, Rebecca. That's my apparent threat to her. How she said it. Apparently I hissed the words out, and I'll tell you why. There's much more here afoot than any of you or your joyless Puritan friends know. There are those among you who can do great things. None that you'll have hanging from your devil's trees. There are those watching everything that happens here. Well, in truth, it was I who was taunted by cruel words. Rebecca inquired coldly, your mother, is she one of those brands from hell, Samuel? Oh yes, her disdain for me had become completely unguarded at that point. Does not everyone know of that diseased coiled nest she stuffs beneath her cap? Oh, who could begin to imagine what sort of pestilence she housed there? Why, it could be smelt for miles as it burned. Oh yes, my father has told me about her old book, her fortune-telling. Yes, she would have done well to hide something like that. At the end of our interaction, I believe I said it mattered little that my mother languished in her uncle's jail, or that she would be free by spring. Oh, and I admitted that my mother did, in fact, have a book of fortune-telling, pages streaked dark with blood. Oh, and many others as well. I am to believe that I decided that I would share a little conjure magic with her that evening. A little sending, I would call it. Yeah. Shadow creatures brought to life, carved in bone and brought to life by human hair and blood. Oh, no, one of oneself. To bring it to a shadow life and to bind it to you. That they might do tasks for you, like teach you some forgotten knowledge. Travel through the dreams of your enemies, huh? Or maybe, just maybe, find something that has been lost. Oh, Rebecca looked at me and said, I am not afraid of the evil thing, Samuel Corbett. While she watched me and the two children make our way through the snow, yet only my tracks could be seen leading into the darkening woods. Oh, and the next morning, outside her chamber door, she found two carved figures, small and wrapped in old gray hair. On each hideous face, a streak of blood. I would never see Rebecca again, alive. Yes, these sendings, these small ones, they would throw stones at her from out of nowhere in this house. They would speak to her in empty rooms. Their voices would crawl upon her like 1,000 tiny wretched terrors. They ripped and bore into her, marrow of her sanity. They tugged and tore as if they would rip her apart. Their words belonged to a language she claimed, as crazy as it sounds, human speech mixed with the call of birds. They told her it was from an ancient time, a time long since decayed and gone from the surface of this earth. They also told her it was from this language the world had been born from the shadows, and that it could be reclaimed by that same darkness. And to that end, they kept after her until she could stand it no longer, until she could find no place to escape. So we found her frozen in the snow near Old Boston Road. Now we are here to gather what remains of her belongings. The final memories of her. For you see, this house has come under new ownership. The judge and all his family are gone, while Goody Corbett has come into a grand inheritance. Yes, my mother, Mehetable Corbett, and her murderous brood shall now occupy this house. With the dust darkness. Oh, and the scurrying things. Oh, and the cobwebs. The cobwebs that seem to grow thicker with each August passing.
Very nice. Oh, forgive me. I wasn't expecting any company. You see, something terrible has happened this evening. The constables came to the house to tell us the body of a young man, Nathaniel, my cousin, has been found in our north field. Our man, Henry, has gone with the constables to retrieve the body. Nathaniel had moved into these rooms just 3 months ago. Now he is gone. It has all happened so suddenly. He had just come to us from Nebraska, a photographer, a fine photographer whose future should have been bright before him, had just inherited his father's studio in Benson, but for reasons that shall never be known, lost his prospects. He came to us and we took him in. My grandmother offered to help him rebuild his collection of equipment if he would but aid us in our little apothecary here. Apprentice with her in exchange for room, board, and salary enough to pursue his art. Our family has roamed so far since the war between the states. My mother searched for our lost ones. Nathaniel was the first to return home in many years, though I am certain more will follow soon. Poor Nathaniel. Gone now. It seems such a shame, such an unnecessary loss. I dare say he did not know what to think of us when first he arrived. My mother, Hareswith, and grandmother, Mehetable Corbett, are colorful local personalities. Eccentric, I can admit this. Strange little things they seem to the outside world, truly ancient, as if they come from another time. Don't you know about them, then? I would hear the people of town whisper to Nathaniel. Some would leave it at that, not wanting to offend him, considering he was a relative, if only a newly discovered one. Some would venture further with trepidation. No one is ever seen leaving the women's company. No one is ever seen moving away. They are simply no longer with us. Vanished. I could think of 20 reasons this would be so, and shared a few of these possible explanations with Nathaniel when he told me what the neighbors had said. They say you steal the blood of your tenants. Steal the blood and mix it with your gruel, just like the horned women from the old fable. The stories went on of old curses, the revenge of witches, descendants who communed with the dead and never ate the groceries delivered to them. Strange shadows flying about the ceilings of their rooms at night. Such is our reputation. There's no one in Salem that can remember a time when our family did not live in this house forever, it seems. And I do not begrudge them their suspicions, considering we are descended from convicted witches. Convicted, yet spared. My ancestor, Mehitable Corbett, and her children took this house from the very judge that helped convict her in 1692. We still use their old physic books, frightful, ghastly recipes passed down from generations of our family. Snail water, blackened toads, spider oil, even a remedy for scurvy that calls for the powdered skull of a criminal that died a violent death. Distilled bits of corpse flesh, guaranteed to cure the plague, the purples, and all manner of fevers. Mother Midnight is our brand now. You can see it on the bottle here. Mother Midnight's caudle for the body, 'twill gladden heart and cure all forms of gout. Our customers dare not ask the ingredients. They are strange things, indeed. Nathaniel seemed to take to his apprenticeship quite well, eagerly even. For a time, he seemed quite comfortable here with me, with us. He and I were quite compatible. I was grateful for his company. The years wear on slowly in this old house. Nathaniel considered himself to be, without question, a very level-headed soul. And initially he was able to cast aside any suspicions the neighbors tried to instill in him. But he admitted to me, finally, reluctantly, that he had begun to hear whisperings, voices when no one else was in the room, movement in the shadows, especially in his room at night, the voices of children speaking softly to each other when no one else was there, in the darkness. I told him this was most likely the demands of the shop. We are in our busy season, and it would pass. We are rarely away from the shop and this kitchen as of late, rarely if ever, but he continued to grow uneasy. One particular evening, after tea, Nathaniel said he dozed off on the settee, lulled to sleep by the charming story of my family's congress with the fairy folk being relayed by my mother, Harriswith. He must have taken to dreaming, because he said, as he watched Mehitable weave a fine bit of satin wool, she removed her cap and took down a long plait of matted hair. She removed strands from this tangle and put them into the weave of her work. He said, though he could hear we were having a conversation, our mouths did not move. Eyes open and unblinking, mouths still and yet speaking. The scene upon which he looked was deeply, deeply disturbing. He moved forward and tentatively touched Mehitable. As her eyes shifted to focus on him, to his horror, he became aware of something moving within them. A swift, small scurrying beneath the pupil and sea-green iris. He began to see this manic movement everywhere, as if all about her was trembling. And then the most revolting thing. Dozens of little silver-white spiders came from the recesses of her hair to disappear in the cloth. He screamed and instantly awoke, still sitting upon the settee. His hostesses, myself included, though now looking at him with concern, were still at their tasks. Mehitable still at her weaving, her hair neatly pinned beneath her veil. It was then that he realized he had been dreaming. After that, he began to grow very cold, very distant. He kept to his room and would no longer speak with me. I only know about the dream because I happened upon a journal he had been keeping. He writes, "The room I occupy has upon the bed a cloth woven by the youngest of these women, self. In the center of the cloth is embroidered the likeness of this dark house. Its very presence fills me with such apprehension. By day it looks lovely, colorful, and rich. By night it seems alive and full of movement. color having ebbed completely. Each night I hear the mortifying sound that I can think to be nothing other than the dry cracking and clattering of bones. Shadows that chase each other, call to each other in the room at night. A presence here that somehow I feel knows me, has been waiting for me. I have removed the cloth from my room. I have put it into trunks, closets, all over this labyrinthian mansion, yet each night the cloth returns, perfect, uncreased, and laying upon my bed. I feel I must leave this place. I cannot bear to look upon these women any longer. The nearness of them brings me unbearable dread. Poor Nathaniel. He seems to have grown rather fragmented, tormented. They found his body wrapped in this blanket. This beautiful blanket that I wove for him myself. Who could have turned him against us? Against me? Who could have driven him out into the darkness? I overheard a few of the constable's men say they will be looking for the individuals believed to be the last to see Nathaniel Hale alive. 2 small children in woolen cloaks were seen walking behind him on North Street. It is hoped that they will have seen whatever happened to him. You know, I feel quite certain that they did. I must be off. We have to identify the body officially. And I do sincerely hope when you go home along North Street that no one's following you. Have a safe evening.